Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about how to deal with bad teachers. I think we all know the impact of what a good teacher can do. So when I went to school, there was a math teacher I had who actually had a math degree, and he was very smart with math, and he was obviously very good at math, and he could solve all these different kinds of equations on the whiteboard that just would blow my mind. And the objective of his class was always to solve this big, long equation that looked really difficult, but once he was able to break it down for you, you realized that it was possible and you could do it yourself with a bit of practice. And that was something that to me was really inspiring. And then math became fun because it felt less like homework and more like a bunch of puzzles like Sudoku or something. And I really enjoyed that. And I think we all have an example where a good teacher can really make you more interested in a topic at school than otherwise you would have. Unfortunately though, bad teachers are probably more common than good teachers, and teachers don't really get paid that much, and so unfortunately you can get really left with a couple of teachers that you just think, how did you get hired? It is a thankless job being a teacher, and you do have to respect the work that teachers do. However, I think we all have felt the impact of a bad teacher that can really cause our grades to fall, and it can really make us loathe going to class having a bad teacher. People argue that school doesn't teach you things like taxes and laws, but what a lot of people miss is that in those things like literature, biology, chemistry, and even arts, you're learning about the world as a whole. It really allows you to travel to anywhere in the world and understand how other people live as well. I think knowing your literature that's native to your country is really interesting, because when you travel to another country, they often have their literature that they really like or value as a society, and you can compare and contrast the different themes and values of authors. And it's the same with art as well. It's the same. And when it comes to something like biology, learning about photosynthesis doesn't feel very important, but in the age of a pandemic, learning about how cells work and how a virus hijacks a cell is integral to really understand how your body gets sick. I'm going to use English as an example, literature as an example, because I feel like poetry and classic literature was a subject I struggled a lot with at school, and I think a lot of young boys struggle in particular with literature. If an old book is boring, it's 300 years old and it's boring, and people are still reading it, it is interesting. It's just that you haven't figured out why it's interesting yet. And it hasn't been explained to you, or it hasn't been really taught to you why it's interesting. To me, the reason why literature class gets taught so poorly is because most students come in with the SparkNotes reading. They have the plot spoiled for them, and the teacher doesn't really do any favors. The teacher's just talking about what a metaphor does, what a simile does, iambic pentameter for poetry and all that kind of nonsense. But the teacher doesn't really talk about what they like about the story. The teacher really never gets into what was your favorite character? What part of the story really resonated with you? What was your least favorite character? A lot of English teachers don't really talk about their personal opinions about the book, and they don't really allow for conversations about just what you like about it. And to me, imagine if you did this with music. Imagine if instead of listening to a song and talking about if you like the song, you saw the music notation, you learned about what triplets are, what piano is, what forte is, what a crotchet is, what a quaver is, or whatever, and how technically when you read the music notation that it is able to convey this certain sound or melody, and that makes the listener feel good. But if you don't really experience that yourself, you don't actually know what you're talking about. You're essentially just regurgitating what somebody else said on SparkNotes. The key message I want you to know from this video is just because a teacher makes the topic bad and makes it unlikable doesn't mean that you can't find things that are interesting about it. And I would encourage you, with the subjects at school that you hate the most, try and find a way to become interested in them in spite of everything that's happening at school. Become interested in it, because they're not going to be able to help you, unfortunately. Really bad teachers, can set the most monotonous and unproductive homework ever. To me, homework shouldn't really be about flogging a dead horse. It should be about learning new concepts and engaging with the topic. And this is going to be controversial, but I'm just going to say it. If you really don't like the topic, don't do what the teacher said as homework. And I think a smarter way to do this would be get everybody in the class involved, because chances are if you don't like the class, other people in the classroom don't like it either. Or get yourselves a Google Doc, and there's probably heaps of stuff you can do this now with ChatGPT, but essentially if you can just get a Google Doc and have your friends answer each one question and then rearrange the words a little bit, I think you should be able to, do as minimal effort with the homework as possible and still technically hand in, because no one really cares. Or you can just answer all the questions and get them wrong, because who cares? Like, that's not your real personal opinion. It only really matters about the final exam that goes towards your grade anyway. And this is really hard to understand as a high school student, but really just understand that your homework marks just are total rubbish. I mean, your final mark is kind of total rubbish anyway, but homework marks it's really just about your ego. Homework marks are really just to do with ego and your teacher's approval. But still set aside the time to learn about the subject in an interesting way and the particular subtopic that the teacher's talking about. So if it's geography and you're learning about glaciers, they might teach in a really boring way, but just watch a documentary on glaciers and learn, where are all the glaciers in the world? Where, do polar bears live on glaciers? What kinds of animals live on glaciers? Why do they live on some glaciers and not others? All of a sudden I'm starting to ask questions, and I feel like learning about glaciers would be kind of cool now. The other thing you'll find is that when teachers prepare you for exams, the ironic thing is that the teacher themselves have probably never sat the exam and been marked by another teacher. Just think about that for a second. Pretty much everyone's job implies that they've done the thing before, yet a lot of teachers have never actually had their work marked by another teacher under the same exam conditions. So it can be very hypocritical when a teacher can tell you to do something when it can actually be quite the opposite in the final exam. I'm thinking personally of a story where I love geography and we had a really good geography teacher, but that geography teacher left us and we got a new one who was essentially just a soccer coach at the school, but he was from the country, so everybody thought, oh yeah, he can teach geography, and Dubbo, if you know where that is. But he was terrible, and I remember when I submitted my exam essay, he gave me a bad mark for not having all capital letters for my headings, and he didn't really bring up any of the actual substance of what I was talking about in the essay. If you find that your teacher's really bad, it's pretty much impossible to complain and get a new teacher. You're often kind of stuck with the bad teacher. I wouldn't recommend trying to argue it to the school, because chances are, if that teacher's a bad teacher and your classmates don't like them either, the other teachers at the school, even though they may not look like they don't like that teacher, inter-teacher politics is like a whole other thing. Chances are there's no one else that can teach that subject that has the experience or the time to take it on. Yeah, so in short, if you don't like a subject because the teacher's really bad, just try to do as little as possible with them and just learn about the topic yourself in your own way. Learn the actual syllabus, become interested in the topics in spite of whatever the teacher says or what tasks they give you. Crash Course has kind of done everything on YouTube, every topic, so it'd be hard to find one that they haven't done. Dentistry is one of them. Thanks guys, I actually had to study. And the final message I'll have is that just because you get a bad mark in a subject on an exam doesn't actually mean you're bad at that subject. It can just mean that the teacher has their own personal views that you're disagreeing with, and you could just straight up, you do have to have a bit of humility and understand that you're probably wrong most of the time. But I think deep down, if you know that, then that's okay. I hope this advice helps, and please leave a comment down below if you've had experience with a bad teacher or a good teacher. But certainly I'd like to hear from other people's experiences, because I certainly feel like for me, my problem at school was that I paid too much attention to the homework that teachers would give. So I would not like a teacher, but but I would still do their homework, I'd still do everything they said, and then in the final school exam, I ended up getting bad marks because everything that teacher told me was kind of useless. So I'm a little bit envious, whereas a lot of my friends that were smarter than me, they did this, they did their own thing, they didn't really do any of the homework, and yet they were able to get much better grades come the final exams. All right, take care.